to the survivors. And they were in such dense jungle. Now, to get into this jungle, they tell us that they had to do a concerted hit the vines like a tackling dummy, like a football tackling dummy, and they could make a few inches. And Zeke, when he ejected out of the seat, broke his ankle and broke his leg. I mean, it's amazing how he was able to do any of this in that. But so they made their way up into the jungle rather than sitting out in the rice paddy where they could be easily found. And so the canopy at that point is about 200 feet, and it's so dense that light's not penetrating, because they had a little bright light strobe. You know, airline passengers flying today get that little briefing on their, if they go down in water and they talk about this little light. Well, that's just a bright strobe light that they had, and couldn't see it. And the other signaling device they had was what we called a pencil flare, and it was just a little cylindrical tube that had a plunger on it, and you would screw in one flare, pull back, and then the spring would go, and it would send up this, you know, like a Roman candle. That wouldn't penetrate the jungle. They couldn't get the flare to go through the canopy, so we had no way of seeing them. Unfortunately, what we also had was 38 caliber survival weapons, and at that time, the Navy was giving out. Instead of it was like a tracer, but it was a magnesium coated, and so it would burn its way out. And they shot that through the jungle canopy, and here was this bright stream of light coming up. It says, okay, now we know about where they are. So we flew up to that point. It's still at 3,000 feet. We get up there, and when we were in the Philippines, we used to practice a quick descent to get from 3,000 to 500 feet as quickly as possible, and it's essentially unload the rotor system, turn it sideways so that there's no lift at all, and just fall out of the sky in a few seconds, and then come and bring it back into control. Now, we're doing this on instruments. About this time, the combat aircraft patrol overhead was dropping parachute flares, and a parachute flare is nothing more than a magnesium light-producing thing that casts the light down, and they have a little flare to make it. It's a metal canister, and the parachute just helps it descend slowly. And so now we have an artificial horizon. We have some moon, you know, a man-made moon, so that we can see the ground, and we can get some shadows and get some relationship with where we are and where we want to be. But as we came up over the 3,000 feet, we got another missile shot at us, and that went by on the starboard side. Bruce Dallas and Don West both said they saw that one. I didn't see that one because I was on the wrong side of the aircraft. But we came down, got in there, and we flew around a couple of turns to see where the most likely landing place was. Now we're on a side slope. It's still rice paddy, but it's all mud. So as we came into approach, Clyde Lassen could not land the helicopter because there was so much mud. It would just sink in. So he was really having to hold a hover with the wheels essentially in the mud. And that was some tricky flying for that time of day and the conditions. And we told Zeke and Claude to come down the hill, and they said, we can't. The jungle is around. You know, we can't get out of here. Come get us, come get us. So we said, okay. Took off, flew back up, found their position where we got right on top of them. We could see the strobe light now, and pulled into a hover. Now, I said this model of H-2 was very underpowered, and it did not want to hover at 200 feet very well, but that was the extent of our cable. We had a 200 foot, maybe it was 150. But anyway, we had to descend below the treetops in a clearing to get the cable close enough to the ground. And Bruce Dallas is the cable operator. He's running it out, and he can see the survivors on the ground. They are probably less than 10 feet away from where the cable was, and they can't get to it because of the density of the jungle and the vines. And we're holding this hover because we have the parachute flares and we can see trees and everything. Then the parachute flares burned out. I had no visual horizon, and we're down among trees, and Clyde starts climbing out, and on the way out we hit a tree, It grabs a hold of the helicopter. We pitch nose down to the left. I can remember this because I can see the branches coming up. Bruce Dallas gets hit in the face by the limb of the tree that we hit. And don't know how, but we flew out of there. But the helicopter's damaged, and we have a vibration now going. The tail rotor's been damaged. There's a little, what would look like a stub wing to a non-aviation person. We call it a horizontal stabilizer. Back on the tail pylon, that has damage. And we get up into the night and fly around for a while. One thing I missed, because this is my claim to fame, I don't believe I overlooked this. Before we went into that hover, we tried to do a hover, didn't have enough power, so Clyde told us, took off and waved off and circled the area and told me to dump fuel. He never told me when to stop dumping fuel, and I decided, well, that's probably enough fuel. And this is going to be one of our saving elements. So after hitting the tree and flying around and having this aircraft get the shutter to it, now it's not flying very well, but it's flying. And we tell them on the ground, we can't do that. I mean, you were 10 feet away and you couldn't get to it. We can't hold that hover. And if you both get on that cable, I don't think we told them this, but I know that we were thinking this. If they both get on the cable, they may just drag us down, and we'd have to cut the cable and leave them there for good. Because that's the only, we had a powder-activated, what we call a guillotine, just a cable cutter, and in case that ever gets snared. So their adrenaline's running high. They can now hear people running along on paths around the jungle around them, looking for them, and calling to them. And these people running in the jungle are, as Zeke and Claw told me, are literally 10, 12 feet away. I mean, the jungle is that dense in that part that they just, were there. So they kept saying, no, you have to come get us. We can't come down. And I remember telling on the radio, I said, we can't come get you, and if you can't come down, then you're staying there tonight. I said, we'll make it. We'll be there. And so that set up the sequence for a couple of approaches into the same rice paddy. Now all of this light and all of the noise and everything, and there's probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 villages that I can remember. And village is not a good term, hamlet, just a collection of little hooches and huts around these rice paddies where, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50 people would live. I don't know how many would be in there, but we see people stumbling across the dikes of the rice paddy in the parachute flares, and they're shooting at us. And of course, we'd been shot at in the sky when we were flying around, and you see the muzzle flashes coming up, and the little light stuff we just ignored. But then something bigger came along, and that's when we started shooting back. And one of the amusing anecdotes is I had the M16, and Bruce and Don both had M60 mounted guns out either door. And just like split-second timing, Don West on my left side, on my side of the aircraft, and I, with the M16, opened fire at the same time. And this the stillness that we would have. I mean, it was really quiet up there. It was, other than the circumstances, I mean, there was not, much going on in the cockpit as far as noise and that. But all of a sudden, pop, 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 pop. And one of my hot shell casing ricocheted off the windscreen and came back and hit Clyde in the face. And he said, I've been hit. And I thought, oh, hell. Now, I thought something along that line. Now I'm going to have to fly this aircraft. And he reached up, and he wasn't wearing flight gloves, which is against the flight thing. We were flying in marine jungle fatigues with the sleeves rolled up. I mean, you couldn't get away with that in today's safety-conscious Navy in case you go down, you have to have Nomex, and you don't want to burn and all that stuff. So he reaches up, and he feels his hot, wet, sticky stuff coming down. He thinks, oh, I've been hit in the head and I'm bleeding. It was nothing more than his perspiration. So he tasted it and he said, oh, no, I'm okay. So this set up, we made 3 more approaches back into that rice paddy, to shorten the story up. Each time he said, yeah, we can get there. We'd come in, we'd sit, again, holding it in a hover. watching the circle of people in the light